Welcome to Listpedia. The medieval period is considered to have lasted from the 5th to the 15th century. Today, we're counting down the top 10 commonly believed myths about medieval times. Number 10. Work less, play harder. Do you get time off to check Listpedia during your long day at work? Well, feel worse knowing peasants in medieval times had it better than you. It is a myth that peasants labored all day, every day for little pay. Being a farmer was the most popular form of job during medieval times. In reality, work was done between dawn and dusk and very little work during winter. They also partied more, with some celebrations lasting a week. All up, medieval peasants spent around 1/3 of the year on holiday. Number 9. She's a witch! With religion growing and growing in Europe during the medieval period, and many people today believe that it led to superstitions and the burning of many accused witches. It was actually centuries later in the 16th and 17th centuries that this trend took off. Though the lower class did fear so-called witches, the church was not leading the charge or giving it much thought. They taught that witches did not exist, and it was merely an unfounded superstition. Number 8. Middle-aged at only 20. You know, your 20s might be a time for experimenting, but a commonly believed myth about medieval times was that most people could only hope to live to reach 35 years of age. They're close, sort of. The average life expectancy was around 35 years of age, but many factors have greatly tainted the statistics. Bringing down the average age were women and babies that died during childbirth, and toddlers and small children catching a disease that now has a simple vaccine. The fact is that if you were a male and lived to see your 21st birthday, you were most likely to live into your 70s. Number 7. You stink. Another commonly believed myth about medieval times was that everyone and everything smelled bad. In reality, lower, middle, and upper class people highly regarded bathing and hygiene. Most towns had bathhouses where most townsfolk would bathe daily. It was also part of their religious and knighthood ceremonies. Bathing also had a social aspect. Offering to bathe with a guest was a medieval custom. Number 6. Is that a chastity belt in your pants? Everyone remembers that hilarious scene in Robin Hood Men in Tights, where they are vigorously trying to remove Marion's chastity belt, but cannot make a dent. But were chastity belts really used? And were people back then all prudes? Despite what has been widely taught, people in medieval times were quite free with their sexuality. Upper-class marriages were predominantly made out of political agreements and rarely involved feelings, so affairs were had by many. There are also no historical reports of chastity belts, and they are only mentioned in literature as metaphor. So don't worry, if you ever travel back in time, you won't be forced to wear one. Number 5. Good night? We've been raised to believe in knights in shining armor. But just how good were the knights in medieval times? Many imagine them as heroic rescuers of damsels in distress. But in reality, when there wasn't a war going on, they were the ones causing the problems. Petty wars included the destruction of random villages, and despite religious leaders trying to stop the violence, when knights were restless, vulnerable people were going to suffer. Number 4. Primanoctus. These days, men believe in the bro code, and bros before hoes. But it is a commonly believed myth that in medieval times there was a law called Primanoctus. In 19th century France, lords held rights over the lower classes, which meant they were allowed to have sex with any bride on their wedding night before her husband did. While the lords and royalty in medieval times were known for their sexual deviance, there have been no recorded occurrences of anything close to Primanoctus. Number 3. Women's rights. Most people believe that women were given no rights and were subordinate in every way to their husbands during medieval times. Women, in fact, had many rights, which only started to decline in the early modern period. They could inherit, buy, and sell property and goods, run their own business, and held a lot of other legal rights. Number 2. Flat Earth? Maybe the most widespread myth about the medieval times is that everyone thought the earth was flat, and that there was a real danger of sailing off the edge. This myth has been perpetuated to criticize the church, but it just isn't true. Most, if not all, people knew the earth was spherical. They also all agreed that the earth was not the center of the universe. But why was this myth created? It was in 1838 that Washington Irving created the fictional story that Columbus was the one who had discovered the earth was not flat, and astonishingly, parts ended up in our history books. Number 1. Not so horny? When you think of Vikings, you think of strong warriors, long boats, and helmets with horns. But did you know that there are no records of Vikings ever wearing them? Vikings were warriors, and though some countries used costumes to intimidate their enemy, horned or sometimes winged helmets would have been no use to the Vikings. It wasn't until the mid-17th or 18th centuries that this depiction of Vikings really took off. We hope you enjoyed our list of the top 10 commonly believed myths about medieval times. Is there a list that you would like to see? Why not let us know in the comments below? And don't forget to subscribe for more great Listpedia.